Fishermen were horrified to discover that a military transport aircraft suddenly disintegrated in midair without any warning, before crashing into the waters off Tokyo Bay. From that day on, strange incidents began occurring one after another along the coast. People were repeatedly attacked by unknown creatures, and without exception, every victim met an extremely gruesome end. In fact, not a single body was left intact. Detective Shinichiro and his partner Kasumi were ordered to investigate the case, as Shinichiro was preparing to leave the scene and head to a victim's home to search for clues. He happened to notice a beautiful woman whose car had broken down. Out of kindness, Shinichiro decided to give her a ride, but after the woman got into the car, her gaze kept drifting uncontrollably toward the ashtray inside. Although Shinichiro deeply disliked the smell of cigarettes, he told her she was free to smoke in his car. Before long, Shinichiro dropped the woman off near a university. She struggled to carry her suitcase. As she prepared to head upstairs, Shinichiro offered to help her, but she politely declined his kindness. The next day, Shinichiro and Kasumi returned to the vicinity of the crime scene to search for clues once again. They conducted interviews everywhere they could, but achieved very little progress. Cases involving random attacks with no apparent pattern were extremely difficult to solve. But while the two were eating, Shinichiro suddenly noticed a goby fish painting behind the restaurant owner. It instantly reminded him of the rumors spreading around Tokyo Bay in recent days about a gigantic mysterious fish. According to the legend, the creature would often leap out of the sea and attack nearby residents. However, Shinichiro and Kasumi quickly dismissed the idea. If they went back and reported that a giant fish was responsible, there was no doubt they would be fired by their superiors. Little did they know that at this very moment, they were already incredibly close to the truth. At the same time, inside the Tokyo Metropolitan Biomedical Research Institute, the director and researcher Shirzwa were conducting a secret experiment unknown to the public. A few days later, the salvage operation of the plane wreckage was nearly complete. While inspecting it, Shinichiro discovered that one of the cargo containers had been damaged in a very strange way. It looked as if it had been forcibly torn open by some kind of force from the inside. The recipient listed on the container was a company called Hermes Corporation. Grasping onto this lead, Shinichiro immediately launched an investigation, but the company had already relocated overnight on the very day of the plane crash. The case became even more puzzling. Just as the two were preparing to leave, Kasumi found a lighter inside Shinichiro's car. It was the very lighter left behind by the woman who had smoked in Shinichiro's car days earlier. That woman, in fact, was a university lecturer. At that moment, she was standing at the podium, teaching biology and explaining her research findings. It was then that Shinichiro found her. Using the excuse of returning the lighter, he asked her out on a date. The two strolled across the campus, looking just like a sweet couple. After learning that the woman's name was Masaki, Shinichiro exchanged contact information with her and then left. Meanwhile, Kasumi quickly discovered a new lead from surveillance footage. A foreign businessman in the video caught his attention. They brought in a lip-reading expert to decipher the footage, but due to the poor video quality, only 2 keywords could be identified in the end: check the capsule and number 13. That very night, the Babylon offshore work platform in Tokyo Bay was attacked by an unknown entity. All internal security personnel lost contact. Shinichiro and Kasumi followed patrol officers and rushed to the scene. Due to power damage, the interior of the Babylon platform was pitch black. With no other option, the four split into pairs to search for a backup power source. Shinichiro discovered a severely damaged labor robot. Kasumi, on the other hand, picked up an ID card belonging to a security guard. Just then, the power system suddenly rebooted. Moments later, a massive monster crawled out. Shinichiro froze in terror, and at last, he understood why none of the victims had been left with a complete body. At this point, the situation had far exceeded what ordinary police could handle. Fortunately, the creature was extremely sensitive to sound. It was distracted by Kasumi throwing his cane. Seizing the opportunity, Shinichiro hid inside the control room. In his panic, he accidentally touched the lighting switch. The monster was clearly terrified of light. It immediately turned around and charged toward Kasumi and the others. At the same time, Shinichiro activated the elevator and waved frantically at them, trying to warn them that danger was coming, but the young officer had already been swallowed whole by the monster. At the critical moment, the main power supply was finally restored, the monster reacted violently to the intense light. This gave Kasumi a slim chance to survive. Under Shinichiro's guidance, Kasumi ran with all his strength toward the top level, but the monster clearly wasn't ready to give up. Its hunger for prey quickly overcame its fear of the light. In a panic, Kasumi inserted the security ID card, but the door still required a password to open, and the monster was already right behind him. Staggering toward the edge of the railing, Kasumi looked at the monster closing in. He knew that today, he would likely not escape death. At that moment, Shinichiro operated the tower crane and signaled for Kasumi to jump onto it. And just like that, Kasumi finally escaped disaster. The police temporarily suppressed the incident. At the same time, they commissioned the Tokyo Metropolitan Biomedical Research Institute to analyze the severed finger sample left behind by the monster. However, when Shinichiro arrived at the institute, he unexpectedly ran into Misaki there. It turned out that Misaki was a researcher at the institute, and her job as a university lecturer was only a part-time position. Through photos on her desk, Shinichiro learned that Misaki was already married, but her former husband had died in an accident 3 years ago. Even more tragically, her daughter had also lost her life to cancer. After that, Shinichiro revealed his identity as a police officer to her and explained the purpose of his visit. What Shinichiro failed to notice, however, was that when Misaki examined the monster sample, a strange and unsettling smile crept onto the corner of her mouth. The next day, a horrific tragedy occurred inside the research institute. When the police arrived at the scene, they happened to witness a chilling sight that sent shivers down their spines. Afterward, the special forces used liquid nitrogen to eliminate the man-eating monster. Shinichiro froze as he looked at the photographs. The monster in the photos had evolved from the very severed finger he had delivered earlier. No one expected that in just a few hours, it would develop self-awareness and a functioning oral system. The research team detected inside the monster a fusion of vampire cells and human cancer cells. This type of mutated cell could divide endlessly and multiply at an astonishing rate. In other words, this was a man-made monster. What made the situation even more dangerous was that if the police attacked the monster, the skin tissue that fell from its body would only accelerate its cell division and proliferation. As a result, it would evolve into countless monsters. The investigation revealed that the vampire cells were the research achievement of the genius scientist Dr. Nishiwaki. But during the investigation, Shinichiro made an unexpected discovery. There was a little girl in the files who bore a striking resemblance to Misaki. Out of personal feelings, he chose to conceal this fact. What he did not realize, however, was that Misaki was the true mastermind behind the entire incident. It turned out that the Tokyo Metropolitan Biomedical Research Institute had long been conducting secret experiments on vampire cells. Based on past experience, as long as the test subjects were cut off from nutrient supply, their cells would lose activity and be discarded as waste. However, the 13th test subject that caused the riot was not programmed for self-destruction. Instead, it was fused with human cancer cells, triggering mutation. That was how it transformed into a man-eating monster. The institute director instantly realized that Misaki must be responsible. Even though he knew the truth, the director had no intention of holding Misaki accountable, because he understood clearly that the police would soon trace the clues back to the institute. As expected, the next day Shinichiro and Kasumi arrived, but the director had already prepared his explanation. He stated that there were numerous research institutes across the country, and that it would not be difficult for these researchers to obtain vampire cells. However, when Kasumi mentioned the name Hermes Corporation, the expressions of the institute director and his assistant immediately darkened. Kasumi became convinced that this case was definitely connected to the Tokyo Metropolitan Biomedical Research Institute. But when Kasumi applied to his superior for an arrest warrant, his superior told him not to waste his effort. It turned out that just minutes earlier, the police chief had hinted that they should immediately halt the investigation into the institute. Clearly, a deal had already been made at the highest levels of the police force. Meanwhile, in order to eliminate the monster, the institute director sought help from Colonel Ishihara of the military. He handed over a virus bullet capable of suppressing vampire cells. Obviously, the military was also involved behind this experiment. Before leaving, Colonel Ishihara instructed him to leave the country immediately. Meanwhile, Shinichiro continued to secretly investigate Misaki. Eventually, inside her suitcase, he discovered empty vials that had once contained injected vampire cells. Shinichiro tracked down her rental apartment, but Misaki had already moved out. When Shinichiro stepped into Misaki's bedroom, the first thing that caught his eye was a massive portrait of Misaki's daughter. Inside the operations command center, Colonel Ishihara brought in the virus warhead. Although the virus contained in this bullet could effectively suppress cell division and activity within the monster, there was only a single round available, and considering that the monster was still wrapped in the steel armor of a labor robot, delivering a fatal blow would be extremely difficult. In the end, the task of eliminating the monster was assigned to Section 2 of the Metropolitan Police Department's Security Bureau. A unit known for its marksmanship. An abandoned stadium near Tokyo Bay was chosen as the final battlefield. After evacuating all non-essential personnel, the military deployed combat mechs to engage the target. The operation officially began. A submarine reached the offshore waters and released acoustic luring waves. These quickly drew the monster's attention. To prevent the truth from leaking out, the police sealed off the entire area. Meanwhile, Misaki, who was quietly trying to make her way to the scene, found herself trapped inside her car. At that very moment, Shinichiro found her. He then took her with him toward the stadium. Along the way, Misaki confessed that everything had been her doing. However, the monster that others saw as nothing but a horror was fused with her daughter's cancer cells. In Misaki's eyes, this monster was the reincarnation of her daughter, and the reason she had deliberately approached Shinichiro was that, deep down, she hoped someone would stop her from carrying out this insane plan. But now, none of that mattered anymore. On the other side, the military's plan moved into full execution. The monster had been successfully guided into the designated area. The soldiers who had been waiting in ambush immediately opened fire, yet their attacks caused no damage to the monster. At that moment, the police played a recording of Misaki's daughter made while she was still alive. The monster was quickly drawn in by the sound and moved toward the outer perimeter of the stadium. Strangely enough, as the piano piece played by Misaki's daughter began to echo, the monster stopped raging. Instead, it slowly walked into the stadium. Its curious behavior was almost childlike, but that familiar melody was endless torment for Misaki. As the monster fully stepped into the trap, blinding searchlights suddenly flared on. The combat mechs made their slow entrance, and at this moment, the monster looked more and more like a frightened child. Misaki walked to the edge of the steel framework, silently gazing down at what she called her daughter. There was no spectacular battle in the arena. This was destined to be a one-sided slaughter. Yet the monster's combat power was astonishing. For a time, the military's combat mechs were actually suppressed by it. Sadly, none of this could change its inevitable fate. As the virus bullet pierced the monster's body, Misaki also completely lost her will to live. Although Shinichiro caught her as she was about to fall, Misaki's attachment to life had already withered away, rotting alongside the cells inside the monster. At that moment, a transport aircraft suddenly landed. A squad of flamethrower troops slowly emerged from the cargo bay. In truth, from the very beginning, the military had intended to erase everything connected to experiment number 13. The raging flames not only consumed the monster, but also burned away all traces of Misaki's past. In this world, no one can endure the pain of losing a child twice. Now, she was going to reunite with her family in another world. At the end of the story, the incident was covered up by the police as an ordinary criminal case, although some netizens who knew the truth exposed it online. Such truth ultimately became nothing more than idle gossip for bored people. As for what really happened, it was no longer possible to verify, and no one truly cared. As for the deceased Misaki, in this world, perhaps only Shinichiro could truly understand her sorrow and helplessness. A man who had always hated the smell of smoke, he now used Misaki's lighter to light a cigarette.